그때 제가 가진 장점이 무엇인지도 모르고 아예 제가 가진 단점도 모를 때 발레를 시작했다 보니까 제일 큰 문제가 이제 평발이었던 것 같아요. 평발이다 보니까 발레를 할 때 쥐가 조금 많이 나는 편이라 그거를 견뎌가면서 춤을 계속 춰야 했던 거, 그게 가장 극복하기 힘들었던 것 같고요. 제가 다리가 다른 친구들보다 조금 두껍다고 해서 제 다리를 조금 싫어했었는데, 근데 이제 로잔에 갔다 오고 나서 오히려 제 다리에서 나오는 파워풀한 힘이 좋았다고 해주시는 분들도 있다는 걸 느껴가지고 그 두 개가 가장 극복하기도 힘들었고 기억에 남는 것 같아요. 프릭스티 로잔이라는 콩쿨 자체가 학생들 사이에서는 가장 크고 의미 있는 콩쿨이다 보니 제가 그 로잔 영상을 보면서 자라왔기 때문에 그 무대에 서서 제가 춤을 췄다는 것 자체가 엄청 인상 깊었던 것 같아요. 제가 걸어왔던 길, 이게 맞는 방법일까? 근데 그런 의구심을 다 없앨 수 있게 제가 가는 길이 맞았다라는 거를 확인시켜줬던 것 같아요. 그래서 그런 감정이 들어서 조금 감격스러웠던 것 같아요. 한 배역에만 잘 할 수 있는 명수가 아니라 어떠한 배역을 받아도 다 넣어서 소화해낼 수 있는 그런 스펙트럼이 넓은 명수가 되고 싶습니다.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the status UN summit. A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. President Lee Jae-myung and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni held a summit on Monday in Seoul and issued a joint statement dedicated to tightening the two nations' strategic cooperation in AI, chips, and aerospace. South Korea's economy will expand by 1.9% in 2026, according to the International Monetary Fund, thanks to solid performance in overseas semiconductor sales. The U.S. push for Greenland acquisition grows, with President Donald Trump now arguing Denmark hasn't been able to do anything to get the Russian threat away from Greenland. The European Union is reportedly considering hitting the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs worth over $107 billion. We begin with the South Korea-Italy summit. President Lee Jae-myung hosted Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the Blue House, where the two sides addressed the broader economic partnership, as well as a peace on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
The talks were centered on bolstering key cooperation, as Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was welcomed by President Lee Jae-myung at the Blue House.
이탈리아 총리로서는 19년 만에 우리 대한민국을 방문해 주신 것인데 대한민국 국민들 입장에서는 우리 총리님의 방문을 많은 기대감을 가지고
After Lee called Italy an old friend, the sentiment of the bond and friendship was mirrored by the Italian leader.
Geographically, we are very far apart, but Italy and Korea have a lot in common.
The leaders announced a joint statement on Monday, bolstering their strategic partnership in fields such as AI, aerospace, and semiconductors, as well as critical minerals through the multilateral minerals security partnership.
국가의 미래가 달린 과학 분야의 협력이 더욱 확대될 것입니다. 교육 분야의 협력은 양국의 경제 규모와 브랜드 파워에 걸맞는 수준으로 더욱 확대될 것입니다.
We should put more efforts into raising productivity and achieving economic development. Above all, we agreed to do our best for the industry and the economy as a whole.
As to regional and global peace, the joint statement stated their commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, as well as Korea's partnership with the G7.
한국과 이탈리아는 국제 무대에서 가치를 공유하며 글로벌 도전에 공동 대응하고 있는 우방 국가입니다. 한반도 긴장 완화를 넘어 세계적인 평화의 가치를 함께 수호해 나갈 것입니다.
Korea is the most important partner for the G7. The war in Ukraine is very dangerous to the security in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. We will continue to cooperate with a new cooperation on a global level.
Other areas of focus were culture and people-to-people exchanges, and the safety of Koreans participating in the upcoming 2026 Olympic Winter Games in Milano Cortina. Several MOUs were signed on semiconductors, protecting cultural heritage, and jointly tackling disasters. The summit was followed by a luncheon. President Lee was invited to Italy for a state visit within the year, to which he said that his future visit will contribute to expanding the partnership that is mutually beneficial and future-oriented. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
As U.S. President Donald Trump continues to justify his ambitions to take over Greenland, the European Union has been looking to retaliate with what is known as a trade bazooka. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
U.S. President Donald Trump has affirmed that he will act on Greenland. In a post on Truth Social on Sunday local time, Trump stated that Denmark has been unable to get the Russian threat away from Greenland, and that now it is time and it will be done. This is being regarded as an attempt to justify U.S. efforts to annex Greenland, arguing that Denmark has failed to prevent Russian threats in Danish territory. As Trump's ambition to pursue a U.S. takeover of Greenland intensifies, calls are growing within the European Union to activate the bloc's anti-coercion instrument, also known as ACI. Often referred to as a trade bazooka, the ACI allows the EU to restrict trade and services, FDI, financial markets, and other sectors against third countries that economically threaten the EU or its member states. According to the BBC and AFP, French President Emmanuel Macron has been in contact with European leaders to formally push for its activation, while the chair of the European Parliament's Trade Committee has also called for it to be used. Since its introduction in 2023, it has never been used.
So again, the ACI, it could be very effective, but what the EU really needs for the ACI, and even without it, it requires unity. It requires all of the EU member states to stand together in solidarity.
The media has also reported that multiple EU countries are reviewing retaliatory tariffs. This comes as Trump on Saturday threatened Europe with new tariffs. He announced that he would impose a 10% tariff starting next month on 8 countries, including Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and France, which opposes efforts to secure Greenland, which has further prompted a widespread backlash across Europe. Later this week, European leaders will meet at an emergency summit as the EU ramps up preparations for a possible trade dispute with the United States over Greenland. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
In Switzerland, global leaders and industry players are set to make a visit to the annual World Economic Forum in Davos. From this year's agenda to key speech deliverers, our Park Jun-han has a preview.
The World Economic Forum's annual meeting will take place starting Monday in Davos, Switzerland. The forum, which runs until Friday under the theme A Spirit of Dialogue, focuses on how leaders can work together in a world marked by growing competition, weakened alliances, and rising geopolitical tensions. It brings together leaders of governments, business, civil society, and academia to tackle pressing global challenges through public-private cooperation. For this year's event, U.S. President Donald Trump is leading the largest ever U.S. delegation, with tensions already high following tariff threats against European allies, including Denmark, Sweden, and the UK, over opposition to his plans to acquire Greenland. The U.S. president will speak at the WEF on Wednesday as he continues to pressure NATO allies to support his Greenland plan. WEF CEO Birgit Brande welcomed Trump's expected visit.
He's coming here, but he's also bringing 5 of his key secretaries, Secretary of State, but also Secretary of Treasury. So it's a long list. So there will be a broad American footprint.
South Korea's Trade Minister Yo Han-gu will attend the forum, where he will actively participate in discussions on restoring the global multilateral order and revitalizing trade and investment conditions. Yo is set to engage in talks with major global companies and will attend the WTO Informal Trade Ministers meeting. The WEF said more than 3,000 delegates from over 130 countries will attend this year's forum, including 64 heads of state and government, particularly from emerging economies. Park Junan, Arirang News.
Through an opinion piece, the Washington Post stated the world now needs to recognize North Korea as a nuclear power and to start talking realistically about concessions that Pyongyang is willing to make in return. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Though the Trump administration hates to say it out loud, it already knows that denuclearization of the peninsula is no longer an option. This is what a piece from the editorial board of the Washington Post said on Sunday. According to the op-ed, North Korea is a nuclear power, with estimates stating Pyongyang may have up to 50 assembled nuclear warheads in its stockpile and enough fissile material to produce 40 more. While citing an International Atomic Energy Agency report last June that the reclusive regime's nuclear test site at Punggye-ri remains prepared to implement a nuclear test on short notice, which South Korea's intelligence agency confirmed in November, the newspaper used this to back its view that it is time to recognize North Korea as a nuclear power. The Trump administration, too, acknowledges this, though it has not publicly admitted it, the paper says. Washington's changed view on the regime can be seen through its national security strategy released by the White House in December, which omitted references to North Korea's threat. The paper says the omission was calculated, showing a significant difference from Trump's first-term NSS released in 2017, where it stated that North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons poses a global threat that requires a global response and that the U.S. is committed to compel denuclearization of the peninsula. China, too, omitted any reference to its long-standing goal of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in its own arms control white paper released in November, which was included in previous papers. Instead, the latest version only mentions working toward peace, stability, and prosperity on the peninsula. While underlining that the best course is candor, the op-ed advised Washington to acknowledge the risks and coordinate with allies to start talking realistically about limiting the size and range of Pyongyang's arsenal. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund has revised up its forecast for South Korea's economic growth to 1.9% this year. The 0.1 percentage point increase from its October projection reflects expectations of a gradual recovery in the Korean economy. Our Kim Junong has the details.
The International Monetary Fund has once again raised its growth outlook for South Korea, projecting the economy to expand 1.9% this year. In its January World Economic Outlook released Monday, the IMF said the forecast represents a 0.1 percentage point upgrade from October. The forecast exceeds the 1.8% average for advanced economies, reflecting a steady upward adjustment in South Korea's growth outlook. Experts attribute the revision primarily to robust semiconductor performance.
While some areas of the economy remain sluggish, semiconductor exports have continued to lead growth. Rapid gains in chip prices are likely to drive a significant portion of this year's expansion of exports, with memory semiconductor prices projected to rise by up to 70%.
Global economic growth is projected at 3.3% for both last year and this year, following upward revisions of 0.1 and 0.2 percentage points, respectively. Among major economies, the U.S. is projected to have grown 2.1% last year and grow 2.4% this year, backed by fiscal stimulus and easing monetary conditions. China is seen growing 5% last year and 4.5% this year, aided by government stimulus and easing U.S. tariff pressures. Global inflation is seen on a continued downward path, helped by softer energy prices. The IMF expects global inflation to have eased to 4.1% last year and to 3.8% this year, signaling a gradual deceleration. The IMF warned that the global economy remains vulnerable to downside risks, noting that shortfalls in AI-driven productivity and profit gains could trigger market volatility and spill over into the real economy. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
The benchmark KOSPI index broke past the 4,900 mark on Monday, driven by Hyundai Motors amid soaring interest from foreign investors who are betting big on the automaker's physical AI technology. Our Kim Do-yeon explains.
The last milestone before the country's benchmark KOSPI reaching the 5,000 mark has been reached. On Monday, the KOSPI smashed through the 4,900 ceiling, ending the session at a record-breaking 4,904.66. This is a 12th straight day of gains, and less than just a week since it smashed the 4,800 mark. But unlike recent large rallies driven by mostly chips, the milestone was fueled by a structural shift in the market's leaderboard. The pecking order has officially changed. Hyundai Motors, which finished last week as the 6th most valuable company, jumped to 3rd place in a single trading session. Overtaking heavyweights like LG Energy Solution and Samsung Biologics, the automaker's market cap firmly breached the 90 trillion won mark, with its shares jumping more than 16%, closing at 480,000 won. This aggressive buying, led largely by foreign investors, follows the debut of the humanoid robot Atlas at CES. The market is no longer pricing Hyundai as a traditional car manufacturer, but as a physical AI platform capable of mass-producing robotics, the very engine investors believe will carry the KOSPI over the 5,000 line.
Hyundai Motor has been consistently investing in areas like Boston Dynamics. Since they are now beginning to reap the rewards of those investments, this surge in value shouldn't be seen as an entirely unexpected situation.
The frenzy wasn't limited to the auto giant. It ignited the entire robotics value chain. Doosan Robotics surged 19.14%, while Hyurim Robot jumped nearly 30%. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Korean traditional martial arts taekwondo is moving toward a possible joint South Korea and North Korea inscription on UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list. According to the Korea Heritage Service, plans are underway to submit a joint application to UNESCO in March. North Korea filed its own application in March 2024 for taekwondo, traditional martial art in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and it's currently under review. A successful joint inscription will mark the second time the two Koreas have jointly registered an item on UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list, following Sirim, traditional Korean wrestling, which was recognized back in 2018. K-beauty is best known for skincare and cosmetics, but a new trend is putting the focus on scalp care. From head spas to specialized treatments, foreign tourists are increasingly visiting Korea to experience professional scalp care services. Our Tong Hae-rim has the story.
At a hair and beauty salon in Seoul's Myeongdong district, foreign customers receive scalp care services. One customer sits in a chair as a specialist examines her scalp with a micro camera. Close-up shots reveal clogged pores, oil buildup, redness, and even flakes. The customer says she's seeing these for the first time. Step by step, the salon treats her scalp. From deep cleansing, exfoliation, massages, and even a waterfall-like shampoo machine, the process is meticulous. After the session, the specialist once again scans the customer's head with the camera, which shows a visibly healthier scalp.
It was really amazing, and I think clean scalp made it really special because you can see the result at the end of the treatment that you had a dead skin before, and after you don't have it, and you can feel refreshed.
Clinics like this say foreign customers have surged in recent years.
Many customers decide to try a scalp spa as soon as they start planning their trip to Korea. Some even book their appointments 1 or 2 months in advance.
Scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, videos of Korean scalp treatments are going viral and are fueling curiosity. Hair salon managers say this was driven by Korean specialties.
Foreign customers really appreciate how thorough the treatments are in Korea, especially the hands-on techniques. Unlike many places abroad, scalp diagnosis and consultation are included in one session.
According to data from Korea Trip, a Korean travel platform for foreign visitors, spending on case scalp care services from January to November rose 219% year-on-year in 2025. The boom is being led by visitors from Western countries, who account for 58% of total bookings.
I was just thinking when I was getting the treatment done, I need to text my friends to look into doing something like this, because I feel like in the United States we don't have as much information about taking care of your scalp and hair.
What was once considered as a niche beauty service is becoming a must-try experience for foreign visitors to Korea. As K-beauty continues to evolve, scalp care is emerging as Korea's next global export. 정혜림, Arirang News.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. For that, we have our sports editor, Paul Neitz, here in the studio. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you. Hello.
Paul, why don't we start with football and the Under-23 AFC Asian Cup. South Korea is apparently through the last 4, right?
Yes, a 2-1 win over Australia on Saturday means that South Korea have booked their place in the semis. A late header from Gangwon FC defender Shin Min-ha put Korea back in front. Australia had levelled on 51 minutes, restoring parity after Baek Ga-eun had put Korea 1-0 ahead on 21 minutes. The win, though, means a clash with Japan in the semi-finals on Tuesday, with the winners to face either Vietnam or China in the final. Vietnam are led by former Jeonbuk manager Kim Sang-sik. But should Korea fail to beat Japan, there's a match for 3rd place. If they win that, they'll earn a place in the Olympics next time around, along with the 2 finalists. The final will take place on Saturday at 6 p.m. local time in Saudi Arabia, or 12 p.m. midnight here.
Fingers crossed it's a repeat of 2020 then. Now moving on to badminton, Se-young is 2-2 for the year so far, right?
Yeah, she's really carrying on how she left off last year with how strong she is again. But An on Sunday beat Wang Ji in straight games to claim the Indian Open with match scores of 21-13, 21-11. Her diagonal attacks made it hard for Wang to read the shots, allowing An to build up strong point leads, 17-9 at one point in the first game. The India Times described the performance as a masterclass in control, precision and authority. India Today said An was like Nadal on clay, impossible to beat. It's An's 6th World Tour win in succession and 2nd already for the year, having also won the Malaysia Open last week. She's now also unbeaten in 10 against world number 2 Wang Ji. It's also her successful defence of the title from last year, having also won in New Delhi in 2025.
You know, a remarkable athlete indeed. Now moving on to baseball, bad news for Kim Ha-seong, I have to say.
Yes, he's out for 4 to 5 months with a finger injury. The Atlanta Braves shortstop will need surgery on a torn tendon in his right middle finger. The Braves revealed that the injury was sustained after Kim slipped on some ice back in Korea last week. It means he'll miss a large chunk of the 1-year deal he signed for $20 million. He's had such bad luck with injuries and missed a lot of baseball last year, playing 24 games for the Rays, then just 24 games for the Braves. Meanwhile, in other news, St. Louis Cardinals pitcher Riley O'Brien, who was born to a Korean mother, looks set to play for South Korea in the World Baseball Classic. The Cardinals have reportedly accepted an invitation from the national team for O'Brien to head to Japan to play for Korea in their 4 opening round games. The tournament will run from March 5th to the 17th.
Paul, finally to winter sports and snowboarding. Another World Cup title for Choi Gaon, right?
Yes, it's her 3rd of the season, won over the weekend. Choi won the halfpipe title at the FIS World Cup event in Switzerland on Saturday, earning 92.5 points. In the final, each athlete has 2 runs, with the better score used for the final standings. The 17-year-old fell in the first run, earning just 21.25 points, but bounced back in her second run, landing a series of highly difficult tricks, including multiple spins and grabs. Choi is seen as South Korea's big hope for a first Olympic gold in snowboarding.
Let's hope so. All right, Paul, thanks for coming in tonight. I'll see you next Monday.
Thank you, yes.
The rain and snow have cleared, but brace yourselves as a serious cold snap is on the way. Cold wave warnings and advisories will kick in at 9 p.m. tonight for the central regions, the Jeollado provinces, and parts of Gyeongsangbuk-do province. A blast of icy air from the north will send temperatures plunging. Tomorrow morning will be the coldest we've seen this winter. Seoul will drop to minus 13 degrees Celsius, and with the wind, it will feel closer to minus 20 degrees. Not only Seoul, but also most areas will start off with freezing conditions, with Chuncheon at minus 14 degrees, Daejeon at minus 11 degrees. Highs will rise to minus 3 degrees in Seoul, 0 degrees in Daejeon. This cold spell is going to hang around all week, so make sure you're bundled up. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
해금은 2줄로 된 함악기인데 저도 처음에 시작하게 된 거는 그 2줄에서 너무 다양한 소리가 나오는 게 너무 신기했고 일단 해금이 되게 사람의 목소리랑 좀 비슷하다고 많이들 하세요. 줄을 눌러서 이렇게 음을 계속 왔다 갔다 진동하는 그런 형태를 띠고 있다 보니까 애절하다라고 많이 말씀을 해주시는 것 같아요. 이 곡은 제가 좀 오래 좋아했던 친구에 대한 제 여러 감정을 담은 곡인데요. 슬펐던 마음, 혹은 뭐 고마웠던 마음, 이런 여러 가지 감정들을 한데 묶어서 마음이 담긴 곡이라고 할 수 있습니다. 현대적인 음악으로 이제 재구성하는 단계를 거칠 때 항상 중요하게 생각하는 거는 음악의 분위기를 해치지 않는 선에서는 뭔가 전통적인 주법들, 식임새, 이런 전통의 냄새라고 할까요? 맛? 이런 걸 살릴 수 있는 요소들을 좀 집어넣으려고 하는 편이에요. 저는 요새 연주하면서도 스스로가 마음도 편하고 몸도 편안한 음악들을 좀 자주 들려드리고 싶다. 제가 음악으로 위로받았던 것처럼 제가 하는 음악들로 여러분들이 좀 위로받을 수 있는 순간이 있었으면 좋겠다. 그런 무대를 만들려고 노력해야겠다라는 생각을 했던 것 같습니다.
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Pony Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Kabion by your side, you can become a Kabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. As U.S. President Donald Trump marks a year into his second term, his foreign policy is drawing sharp global attention, especially under what's now being called the Donroe doctrine. From an assertive military move in Venezuela to expanding strategic pressure across Latin America and the Arctic, Washington's actions signal a bold shift in U.S. global priorities. Trump's recent comments dismissing international law in favor of his own moral compass, coupled with tariffs on European allies, are rattling the foundations of the rule rule-based world order. With the largest ever U.S. delegation headed to Davos, questions are arising about America's long-term strategy, its alliances, and the regional balance of power, including here in Northeast Asia. So, for more on this, we connect to Min Jung-hoon, professor of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. A big welcome, Professor Min.
Good evening.
And also joining us is Daniel Connolly, an associate professor of international relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start our discussion with Professor Min. Like I've said, President Trump will mark the first anniversary of his second term on January 20th American time. How would you evaluate the overall direction of the second Trump administration's foreign policy?
Yes, as you know, President Trump aggressively pursues the America First foreign policy to maximize the national interests of the U.S. on the international stage. And based on the principles of strategic selectivity and concentration and the transactional approach to alliances, the Trump government tries to enhance the effectiveness of its foreign policy. Specifically, strategic selectivity is intended to safeguard America's core interests more efficiently. The Trump government argues that U.S. cannot and should not be involved in every global issue. So it wants to minimize the risk of entanglement in unnecessary conflicts and to concentrate its diplomatic and military resources on protecting core interests, such as strengthening its influence over Western Hemisphere and tracking the rise of China. And the Trump government also made it clear that U.S. pursues a transactional alliance approach to reduce the financial burden of security commitments. So during the first year in office, it pushed allies to increase military spending under the name of alliance modernization. In addition, it imposed reciprocal tariffs to the world in order to reduce U.S. trade deficit. And such unilateral behavior resulted in increasing the instability in the global trade order and weakening free and multilateral trade. So overall, I think the Trump government's assertive pursuit of American interests on the international stage raised concerns about the future trajectory of U.S. foreign policy and the uncertainty of the international security and trade order.
Right. We've been seeing some dramatic changes in his second term. Now, in fact, lately, the U.S. launched a military operation in Venezuela. Professor Connolly, we want to ask, what kind of shift or meaning does this latest move actually carry in the context of President Trump's America First strategy?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that Trump is very transgressive, but also very cautious. A great deal of his violence so far in his second administration continues to resemble the violence of his first administration in that it is often symbolic or even theatrical in a way that the U.S. does not take many risks. If you think about the American bombing of Iran, it occurs already after the air defenses are basically reduced by Israel, missile strikes on Nigerian insurgents who have no way to kind of retaliate. But I would say the strike on Venezuela was much riskier. There was a greater potential for U.S. service of men to be killed or wounded seriously. I do have some serious questions about to what extent the Venezuelan defenses were compromised before the strike went in. But certainly, I think the strike on Venezuela shows a much more kind of risk appetite on the behalf of Trump. And I don't think the violence itself is an important difference, though. Let's be honest, American presidents have historically used violence internationally much more than other leaders. They have the means and often the reason to do so. Even Obama, who we think of as the least violent U.S. president in recent memory, oversaw the dropping of about 26,000 bombs in his final year in office. So I think that Trump's foreign policy is not fundamentally different in some sense from other U.S. presidents.
There's a strong sense of U.S. exceptionalism in Trump's administration. I would say the big difference is it's much stronger and rawer and less sophisticated than the U.S. exceptionalism in previous administrations, and increasingly aimed at his own allies, which that is a big fundamental shift.
Right. So, Professor Connolly, you just mentioned that it's not really very different from past administrations. Then how would you define what Trump calls the Donroe doctrine? And what are the key differences between this one and the original Monroe doctrine?
Right. That's a great question. The original Monroe Doctrine, which was made in 1823, was basically intended to prohibit European colonial interventions in the Western Hemisphere. So in this sense, the original doctrine was anti-imperial. But in 1904, there was the Roosevelt interpretation of this, the corollary, and it was much more imperial. And it said basically that the U.S. had the right to engage in police interventions in the Western Hemisphere because it was a civilized country and it had the obligation to reduce misgovernance. The so-called Trump corollary to this, which he just announced in the recent U.S. national security document, has much more in common with the Roosevelt version in that it worries about poor governance in the Western Hemisphere causing mass migration to the United States. But unlike Roosevelt, Trump focuses a lot more on ownership of critical infrastructure and resources in the Western Hemisphere. And he himself has repeatedly emphasized that he wants ownership of places like Greenland or the Panama Canal. And this, I would suggest, is maybe a defining feature of the Donroe Doctrine compared to the original Monroe Doctrine.
Thank you for the, excuse me, clarification, Professor Connolly. Now, so it seems as though the scope of U.S. pressure is widening. So let's move on to beyond Venezuela to countries as Mexico, Colombia, and Greenland. Professor Min, what's the strategic background behind, targeting Greenland and Latin America?
Yes, as Dr. Connolly mentioned, the second Trump government's national security strategy, which was released in November last year, declared the survival and the safety of the U.S. as the most important strategic objective. And to this end, the strategy emphasizes protecting the American people, territory, economy, and way of life from external aggression and hostile foreign influence. And the Trump government declared that strengthening its influence over the American continent or Western Hemisphere is the top security priority. Specifically, it outlined an enlist and expand approach aiming to work with existing regional allies and partners to control immigration, block drug trafficking, and enhance land and maritime security. And it also stressed the development of new partnerships and strengthening the U.S. economic appeal as a regional anchor. And to support this, the Trump government signaled the potential redeployment of U.S. military forces to address urgent threats within the Western Hemisphere. And this strategy is called the Donroe Doctrine and reaffirms the strategic importance of the Western Hemisphere to U.S. national interests. So it shows that U.S. under Trump presidency is shifting away from traditional role of global hegemon and international policeman, and instead pursues a realist foreign policy focusing on the protection of core national interests. So the Trump government is expected to station more military forces domestically to support homeland security, such as crime control, counterterrorism, and border protection. In addition, based on the arguments about immigration control, counter-narcotic efforts, and border and maritime security, the Trump government is likely to foster pro-U.S. partners and intensify efforts to curb China's growing influence in the region and enhance both political and economic U.S. interests.
Well, staying on that note, President Trump announced a 10% tariff on 8 European countries that have sent troops to Greenland. Professor Connolly, how would you think this move will influence how America's European allies respond and position themselves going forward?
Right, absolutely. This puts European leaders in a really tough spot. And I think it helps to maybe look back a little bit and put this moment in historical perspective. Ever since the end of the Cold War, European leaders had two broad options. One, they could invest in becoming more autonomous from the US and chart their own path, or they could kind of free ride on NATO and exist as kind of junior US partners. Now, since the Cold War, various European nations pushed for different options, but generally, Western Europe pursued a strategy where they had high status, but very low actual agency because they were, in essence, free riding off NATO. Today, we see the consequences of this. Trump is blaming European weakness as one of the reasons why he wants ownership of Greenland, saying that since the Europeans can't protect it, the US deserves to have ownership of it. Europeans are themselves too dependent on the United States to do much about it. So if the Europeans allow the United States to take sovereignty of Greenland, it's going to really make them look bad because they're talking about the sanctity of sovereignty and never changing international borders in the context of Ukraine. But if they allow it to happen in Greenland, it's going to undermine their position even more. I think we already saw this a little bit after the US military operation against Venezuela. Many Western European leaders offered very lukewarm criticism of the United States, even though the US had just kidnapped a foreign head of state. So I think for Europe, the big problem is that becoming autonomous is not something that happens overnight. It's something that should have happened decades ago. So regardless of what happens over Greenland, I think Europe is not going to be able to change its position of insecurity vis-a-vis the United States anytime soon.
Right. So the latest incidents, it seems to have shocked many of our neighbors. But what's more surprising was that President Trump, through New York Times, he said, "We don't need international law. My morality alone is the check." Professor Min, what kind of impact could this kind of mindset have on U.S.-led rules-based international order and its alliance system?
Yes, again, through the NSS report, the Trump government declared that the era in which U.S. played the role of a global giant underpinning the international order has come to an end. Instead, it is pursuing great power diplomacy and trying to maximize its national interests on the international stage. And considering the declining willingness and the waning capacity of the U.S. to provide the global public goods and engage in diverse international challenges, expectations for renewed American global leadership, whether under the current Trump government or its successors, appear quite infeasible. Meanwhile, in order to focus on protecting its core interests and reduce the security cost, the Trump government expects its allies to assume leading roles in maintaining regional security and want to establish a burden-sharing network to reduce U.S. defense spending. And such a policy orientation led to growing expectations for South Korea to play a more proactive role in defending the Korean Peninsula under the name of alliance modernization. And as you remember, the outcomes of the two ROK-US summits held in August and October last year illustrate President Trump's priority on expanding South Korea's contributions and enhancing its military capabilities through the additional acquisition of American weapons. And considering that North Korea's persistent military threats and the rapidly shifting security environment in East Asia, it is imperative that South Korea strengthen its capabilities and further develop practical security cooperation with the United States. It seems that Washington's perception of alliance becomes transactional and its commitment to allies appears less robust, but no other country can replace the U.S. as South Korea's primary security partner. So South Korea needed to enhance its military capabilities and develop the DRK-US alliance into a more balanced and reciprocal strategic alliance.
Definitely. But it's quite concerning that many people think that American attention it's actually now fixed on the Western Hemisphere. Professor Min, how might that shift actually affect the strategic landscape here in Northeast Asia? And more specifically, President Trump recently said the Taiwan issue is Xi Jinping's decision. How would you interpret that?
Well, again, the NSS reports of the second Trump government reaffirms that the security of the American continent and the centrality of U.S.-China relations in ensuring the stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific consists of the top priority of U.S. foreign policy. So it shows that the Indo-Pacific region is a critical theater of geoeconomic and geopolitical competition, and U.S. want to maintain strategic advantages and deter military escalation in the region. And it also emphasizes maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific by ensuring freedom of navigation and securing stable access to supply chains and the critical minerals. And the Trump government, in the NSS report, reaffirmed the defense of Taiwan as a critical regional security priority and wanted its key regional allies like South Korea and Japan to work closely together with the U.S. for the regional security. So it is likely that currently President Trump tries to manage the relationship between U.S. and China ahead of the upcoming midterm elections in November. But it is likely that there would be a little change in the strategic importance of Taiwan for U.S. security interests, even under the Trump presidency. So overall, along with the strengthening influence of Western Hemisphere, tracking the rise of China is also a top security priority, even for Trump government.
So we'll have to look at the developments of the two biggest powers. Now, meanwhile, North Korea, it has strongly condemned the U.S. for its operation to detain Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. In that context, Professor Conley, how would the Donroe doctrine and Trump's unpredictable military posture shape Pyongyang's future strategy towards Washington?
Right. I think it's greater than just the military strike on Venezuela that we have to consider. I think Trump's second administration has really shown the dangers of negotiating with the U.S. For example, the Israeli surprise attack on Iran occurred after the U.S. lulled Iranian leaders into complacency by scheduling talks, and Trump even boasted about doing this. Likewise, in the case of Venezuela, its leader signaled in a New Year's kind of a speech that he was willing to open negotiations with the United States, but the attack went ahead anyhow. So at this level, I think the North Korean leadership is deeply concerned about the risks of negotiating with an unpredictable United States. More fundamentally, if the United States' behavior is resembling the so-called law of the jungle, this is only going to encourage North Korea to arm itself and double down on its own domestic security apparatus. Trump's aggression, as I mentioned earlier, is very opportunistic. It tends to be aimed at weak countries or those in the middle of a crisis. Trump shows a lot more respect for powerful countries that can threaten the United States. And I think, unfortunately, maybe one lesson that the North Korean leadership is learning from all of this is that North Korea's ability to inflict serious harm on the U.S. or its interests is the only key to safety in this troubled era.
Thank you for that. Now, finally, before we conclude our discussion tonight, so with this emerging international landscape defined by President Trump's Donroe doctrine, Professor Min, what direction should South Korea take in terms of its foreign and security policies?
Yes, again, as I mentioned earlier today, the Trump government puts its strategic priority in strengthening its influence over the American continent and tracking the rise of China. And it also wants its allies to play greater roles in the regional security. So U.S. wants South Korea to play a leading role in protecting the Korean Peninsula, and also want South Korea to do something more for the regional security. And it is also true that U.S. willingness and the capabilities for the regional security becomes more unstable. But South Korea needed to enhance its military capacity and move forward to secure the self-defense capabilities. And again, South Korea also needed to enhance military cooperation with the U.S. and developed the ROK-US alliance into a more balanced, future-oriented, reciprocal strategic alliance. So, of course, there is a growing uncertainty and instability in the global security order, but the geopolitical and the geoeconomic impact of South Korea for the United States is stable and becoming more important. So I expect that the security situation on the Korean Peninsula will be stably maintained through South Korea's enhanced military capabilities and still strong ROK-US alliance.
All right, so we will have to come up with a strategy that moves with its new reality with the help of Washington as well. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks to Professor Min.
Thank you.
And Professor Connolly for your insights. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.